Hey everyone, welcome to Crushing Classical, redefining a thriving classical music career. I'm Tracy Friedlander, and today on the show I have Suzanne Bona, host of the well-known and long-standing radio program Sunday Baroque. On the show today, Suzanne shares about her unexpected career turn she had decades ago when she was headed toward a career as an orchestral flute player, but ended up applying for a job in radio. The job has blossomed into a fulfilling career, hosting a national radio show that also allows many performing opportunities on flute. Today, we talk about her career path and navigating the definition and ownership of being a musician, the way she found her voice as a performer, and how musicians can tap into unknown resources through radio to find more performing and promotional opportunities for their projects. But before we get started, I want to thank Fix Music for sponsoring Crushing Classical Podcast. FixMusic.com is the online resource for high-quality, affordable sheet music. There are some new offerings at Fix available that you'll want to know about. Now there's organ music, a large choral music selection, as well as orchestra parts that you would need for concerts or auditions. And now, they are actively working with choral and orchestra directors to help plan seasons. So if you're a program director and you want some help on choosing pieces for your season, contact Fix Music today through their website. And as always, free shipping on all domestic orders. Check out fixmusic.com for your sheet music needs and use the link in the show note to receive 10% off your first order. Let's get started. Hey, Suzanne, welcome to
Hey.
Crushing Classical.
Oh, thank you so much. What a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you. I'm so glad you're here. So tell me about your unique job in classical music. Of course, I know what it is because we've talked already, but I want to hear all about it. As a flute player and a radio broadcaster, that's an unusual combo. So tell me how you got into radio.
Yeah. Well, my unique job, as far as I'm concerned, is like the best job in the world. But and I wish everybody could feel that way about their job. But so I am trained as a flute player. I started playing at 8, and I had formal training from junior high school up through getting a college degree in flute performance. And like a lot of people who have jobs in the arts, I was looking for as is euphemistically called, a day job. So
Yeah, we all need one at some time. But what's cool is that the radio job that you got was still related to music because you
yeah.
play music on the radio. So yeah.
Exactly, very much so, and in other ways too, which I think we'll probably talk about. But I
Yes.
I got into this radio thing because I had a couple of other jobs. I was looking for the day job with the insurance and the salary and the paying off the
Yeah.
bills and all that kind of thing. And I had a couple of jobs, but this ad that was in the paper in my hometown of Fairfield, Connecticut, just spoke to me. And it was a job. It was actually a posting for several jobs, one of which was a full-time job as the underwriting director. Now, underwriting in public radio is the sort of the equivalent in commercial radio of the advertising department. So you're
Hmm.
basically selling to local businesses and organizations time on the air to, help pay the bills. So I had some skills and some experience that I felt really qualified me for that job. Although I wasn't really excited about the idea of a sales job, I thought I can do this. But they also had, and this was what was sort of like my eyes were on the prize because they had some part-time jobs, including a part-time weekend announcer. Now, I went in and I said, I had the ad and I said, all right, I need a part-time job. Excuse me, I need a full-time job, but I really want this part-time job that you're advertising. So how about if we make a little deal here? And I pitched to them that I would get the full-time job as the underwriting person, but also take on that weekend shift doing an announcing shift, learning the radio part of radio. And they were
That's smart. And can I just interject for a second? That's pretty bold of you because a lot of times when you're applying for maybe your first job ever, it doesn't occur to negotiate for yourself like a package that works for you, right? That's kind
yeah,
of what you were doing, which is pretty
yeah.
impressive.
Yeah. I
So,
think I was probably just, I was young and I probably just never even occurred to me that, well, this just isn't done. I just thought, well, they got a problem, they need people, and maybe I can help them solve it, and
yeah.
and I was really, really fortunate because they took me up on that offer. And part of the reason, I didn't realize how much they needed me, because the program director, who was really the direct hiring manager, had been working literally 7 days a week on the air. So he was
Oh,
he was quite happy to offload Sunday morning to somebody else.
yeah.
So the parameters he set for me basically were just, all right, you start at 7 and you're on until 1. And I was not on the air literally hosting music for all those time. There were some network programs and I was just sort of babysitting tapes or network feeds. But there was a slot in between, about 90 minutes between two network shows, for which they needed someone to host local music. And so he just said to me, we all were picking our own music at that point. And he just said to me, all right, play Baroque music. And we called it Sunday Morning Baroque at that time, because it was from 8:30 in the morning until 10 a.m. And I just took it and ran. It was something I made my own. My speculation is that he told me that, number one, to give me some parameters, because I had never done any radio before. And I think he realized I needed some kind of direction. And I also think that there's sort of a reputation of people who come out of a school with a music degree that, maybe you have sort of far-flung musical tastes. And I think he wanted to keep my feet on the ground and just give me some very reasonable parameters to stay within for what I chose to play on the air. So that's how Sunday Baroque was born.
Wow. That's so great. So you like kind of happenstance. It
Yeah.
just they picked Baroque and that was he could have said, let's make it classical and it would have
Yeah.
been
Yeah.
classical
Yeah.
Sunday.
Yeah.
So
Exactly,
so yeah.
exactly. And I also I benefited from another happy accident, which is that this program director left the station only a few months later, and he was the primary person who really knew the repertory and knew classical music. And when he left a few months later, they were really very they didn't have a very deep bench, let's say. And the general manager turned to me, still very new, very green, and said, okay, you want to be the program director? Because they just didn't really have anybody to step into that role. And I had no business taking that job, but of course I took it. And as they say, the rest is history. But I was fortunate to be there at that moment when that was possible, to get a promotion like that so early in my career, when I was so very green. And I was really fortunate that he allowed me, that he gave me that opportunity. And I still work with that manager. George Lombardi is the general manager of WSHU to this day. And I just thank my lucky stars that he gave me a chance like that, because it's changed my life in almost every way.
That's so great. So did you like Baroque music before he chose that type of music for you to play? Or was it kind of like, oh, okay. I mean, what was your reaction when he said that? Were
Yeah.
you like,
Well, well,
where'd you go with that?
my reaction was really more the latter. I mean, it's not that I disliked it, but it certainly wasn't anything that was, um, a particular area of expertise for me or anything.
Right.
I had a degree in music, and so of course you learn the basics and you take plenty of music history classes and all of that. But I had never played, and I still to this day do not play a Baroque instrument. I'm a modern flute player, and when you're an instrumentalist, particularly on a wind instrument like a flute, a lot of the repertory you learn a broad range, and I had wonderful training, so no way to criticize that. But you don't really focus on the Baroque era. I mean, there's
Right.
sort of a more heavy concentration for flutists on Romantic era, a lot of French music and contemporary music. So, I
Yeah.
had my obligatory Bach sonatas in my arsenal, and maybe a Handel sonata or whatever, but really not much else. So yeah, so it was kind of new to me. And I feel like we've grown up together. That was 31 years ago. And I just thought, okay, I'm gonna make this my own, because I was young and I was enthusiastic and I really wanted this exciting new thing that was in front of me. I wanted it to be a success, and I wanted it to be fun, and I wanted it to be gratifying for listeners. And it was like a new way of performing. Um, not on
Yeah, that's what's most interesting about it. It was a totally new way of performing,
Yes.
speaking and
Uh-huh.
into the radio, right? Yeah. So you said 30 years it's been since you started on the radio. So tell me about the technological advances that you've had to adjust to over the last 3 decades.
Yeah, yeah. It's been extraordinary. It was when I first got out of college, CDs were just coming on the scene.
Mhm.
My work study job at the University of Connecticut Music Library was, behind the desk, and we mostly still played LPs. And we just
Yeah.
got our first CD player, right, like probably like my last semester. Um, and so, when I started at WSHU, we had this tiny little batch of a couple hundred CDs. We still had the turntables in the studio, but mostly we were using those CDs, and it was gradually building up. So that was sort of the first threshold to go over, was just making that transition, because I did start right at that moment. Um, but things like, I mean, just think about the internet alone.
Yeah.
The kind of digital storage and digital delivery that we have now has remarkably changed the kind of workflow that we have in producing Sunday Baroque, because I'm actually remote from the studio. I produce it in partnership for national distribution. I produce it in partnership with the station, my original station, WSHU in Connecticut, but I no longer live there. Um,
Oh,
so
wow.
yeah, so I'm doing a lot of the writing and editing here in a studio and in my home office in Cincinnati, Ohio. And then we're just literally clicking and dragging the audio file to the station in Connecticut. And it used to be,
So different.
yeah, yeah, so different. Used to be that I would literally hand deliver to the UPS office a digital audio tape with my voice tracks on it and then mail it. So, that's the kind of thing that has changed dramatically over the years, mostly the technical stuff. And I'm really proud to say that despite the fact that this is a program that focuses on very ancient music, sort of the more ancient end of the classical music, trajectory and
Yeah.
history, we have actually been very enthusiastic about and real early adopters in terms of using the new technology. That's how we were able to launch this show nationally, and it was how we were able to separate from our original affiliation with National Public Radio, when we all agreed that it had run its course, and then we decided to distribute it directly to stations. It was because of the technology that was emerging, and it was because of our vision and commitment to using the technology. So I feel really, I kind of give us a pat on the back for that, because I think it would be really easy to just sort of say, well, this is how we've always done it, and
Mhm.
I I've
Definitely.
just never been one to sort of accept that as a good reason or explanation for not making changes and improvements.
That's great. That's a good quality to have, especially in radio,
Yeah,
considering that everything
yeah,
is moving,
yeah.
right? To podcasts and stuff. Do you guys do podcasts, and are you on Spotify and things like that? Like, what other modern things are you doing now?
Well, as far as social media, of course, we're on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, and we do have a podcast. Our podcast is not of the show, though. The podcast is of interviews, just like this one. Although I'm on the other side of the interview microphone, and
Mm,
I've reached out to various, mostly musicians, but not all musicians, but mostly musicians, to talk about maybe a new CD or an unusual instrument or that sort of thing. Because I try to keep music the star on the program, the radio program itself. And so I really try to keep the talk to a minimum. Um,
right.
and so therefore I try to have a component to direct people to learn more, to hear more, to dig a little deeper. And so that's how we use our podcast. Is really, it's an interview platform. The other thing we have, and this is really kind of a legal thing, and this actually in a way tangentially ties into your question about technology and its evolution over the years. So we have the limitation because we use commercial recordings that are protected, the rights of both the performers and the recording labels that produce these
Mhm.
CDs. They own the rights to these, and so broadcasters have certain abilities for the broadcast medium. Well, way back when, the laws did not consider things like web streaming. So there was this gap way back in the late 90s of people saying, like, okay, well, like, what are you allowed to do? Because we've got the right to broadcast, but do we have the right to put these things online? you know um we don't have the right to distribute them. I can't make Sunday Baroque downloadable for anyone because we don't own that material. That would be basically taking those, goods and services out of the hands of the people who have the legal right to them and giving it to somebody else. So we're not allowed to do that. But they never did, they being the legislators really never came up with a way of determining how to distribute online, so that was something that happened way back, around 2000, where there was a real review of what the laws were, and they really had to go back and take into consideration what you do about, web streaming and that sort of thing. So,
Yeah.
again, the technology sometimes has not been considered adequately for a lot of things, including the law. But
Yeah. I mean, the same problem occurs in orchestras when considering can we do live stream or anything social
yeah,
media during a live concert,
yeah,
because contracts and
yeah,
AFM negotiation and all that stuff, and musicians getting paid for something being distributed
yeah, yeah,
essentially,
yeah, exactly.
and they don't keep up with it. But in the meantime, it should, it's a shame, in some cases, because that's where everybody is.
Yeah,
They're looking to see things and hear things first, maybe before they go hear a live program. Or
yeah,
I don't know if this is the case for radio, like it's not that much of trouble to tune into your radio at a specific time, but
yeah,
you know if they're only looking in their podcast app, they might not notice it. But if they see your podcast, and then they can make an exception to, I got to check this radio show. So
yeah.
when is your podcast, so that's an extra job of yours then, essentially, is doing podcasting
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
interviewing.
yeah, it is actually. And it's really fulfilling. And again, it augments and completely supports the broadcast part of it because, obviously it's important for me to know what's going on. And again, I said we're talking about these musicians mostly and their new projects, their new recordings and their interesting research and whatnot. So it dovetails very, very nicely. But yeah, we're also, you talked about online and one of the other things we do, we are able to be online. We have a stream of the show. So we always,
Oh,
yeah, we always have the most recent stream. So you're absolutely right. Somebody can stumble on the podcast and then think, okay, well, it's not Sunday. Well, that's okay because you can have Thursday Baroque, and
oh, that's
yeah,
cool.
yeah, yeah. So you can listen to the most recent show. We have a stream of all 4 hours of each weekly show, and it's a nice way for people. And, a lot of people say they listen and then, or maybe their local station doesn't run all 4 hours, and so they use it to hear the hours that they didn't hear locally, or they just say, "I
Mhm.
really like it, and it's nice music to work to," so they just kind of play it in the background while they're working during the week.
Do you get a lot of feedback from listeners as a radio host?
I I do, and I have to say that was probably one of the most surprising and pleasantly surprising things when we launched the show nationally. Now, I have to tell you that, the old expression, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. A lot of times in radio, at least it was my experience working in local radio, that, a lot of times, unfortunately, you only hear or you mostly hear from the people who are unhappy. They're unhappy because their favorite show didn't
Right.
air, or they have a
Exactly. Right.
problem, or they didn't like this piece, or whatever. And so but you develop one thing is you develop a thick skin over that too. It's like being a performer too. You go, well, okay, well, nothing I can do about it. Um,
Yeah.
so I really went into when we started 20 years ago as a national program, I really went in, with a pretty well developed thick skin thinking, okay, I can handle this. I understand when people complain, it's because they care and they're interested. And so, I went in with what I felt was a really positive attitude. I have been so blown away by how overwhelmingly positive our interactions are. It is very unusual, very unusual. And I mean, like on the order of maybe twice a year, 3 times a year, I get something, and people are almost universally very gentle and kind. They're not angry and they're not mean. They don't make personal attacks. They might be disappointed by something, but it's really very, very unusual for me to get complaints, and it's very common. I get every week. They're dying to know more about this piece, or could I help them identify this? Could I make some recommendations of other music they could buy? do I have a favorite ensemble, or do I have a favorite recording of a particular piece? So we have such marvelous interactions. And
That's great.
yeah, yeah. And it has warmed my heart. And I feel like we're in this, little like support club together because we all, we just love this music and we love music in general. And we're just enthusiastic about it and we can share our enthusiasm. And, I just love it. And as I say, it was probably the biggest surprise of, the career in launching this as a national show.
So, have you, as a person who's worked in radio for as long as you have, would you say there are unknown opportunities for musicians in radio that maybe they need to know about, or have you had musicians come to you as someone who's worked in radio for so long, like for opportunities? Like maybe there's opportunities people don't know about. Maybe you could shed some light on that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, certainly, as I said, I got into it because I needed a day job. And so as a musician,
Yeah.
it seemed like it was a natural fit. And as I said, really, it turned out to be such a great fit, my perfect fit. Many, many of my colleagues in classical broadcasting have a background as performers. There are singers, there are instrumentalists, there are composers, there are so many people I know very well personally who are performing musicians or actively pursuing their craft as musicians. And for that matter, there are people in other arts as well. There are, lots of actors and, just people from the creative arts who, just like I did once upon a time, needed a day job and got into this business. And public broadcasting does tend to foster creativity. It does tend to seek out people who have a sympathetic ear for the arts and for artists and whatnot. So that's not a huge surprise. There are stations in large markets, particularly, that will do things like have an ensemble in residence, for example. That's not to say that it's not possible in smaller markets, but I would say, if you're a musician or in a small ensemble in a smaller community, like, hey, maybe you can write a grant or apply for a grant to be the ensemble in residence at a local classical station. They'd probably be
Mhm.
thrilled to partner with you on something like that. So that's the kind of thing. And then just from my own experience, I have found myself playing more and more as an adjunct to my broadcast career. I've been doing performances for various stations all over the country. I've played in Phoenix. In fact, I'm probably going to be doing something else in 2019. I've been to Guam twice. The Guam station has run Sunday Baroque for many, many years, and they were nice enough to invite me I want to say about 7 years ago to play the first time as the soloist with their symphony orchestra. So that playing my identity as a musician is finding a wonderful blend with my day to day responsibility and role as a radio producer of a national show. Because of these appearances that I'm making, I'm going to be performing up in the Pacific Northwest in March of 2019 with a musician, actually a guitarist I've never met yet.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. So we're going to be doing a full blown recital and some really challenging music too, and that would never have happened. I mean, we wouldn't have ever had an opportunity to meet, and certainly not to play together. So, yeah, I think, and I have also done. This has been a real priority for me as a producer of a national show is to try to not only with the blog that I write, and not only with the interviews, the podcasts, but when I do events with stations, whether or not I'm playing, I also try to suggest to them that they include local musicians. So, for example, we'll sometimes do like a Sunday Baroque event for a station where we bring in some local musicians who play really interesting, unusual instruments. So you bring in a viola da gamba player and a theorbo player and, somebody who plays a sackbut or somebody who play, these unusual, really, and they're beautiful. They're visually beautiful instruments. Few people have ever seen these things and let alone heard them play up close and personal. And we do this sort of interesting little give and take. And I walk around with a handheld mic and I ask the musicians questions and I get them talking about their instruments. So, and listeners love this. I mean, the thing about public radio listeners in particular is we are just so hungry for knowledge and information and experiences and lifelong learning. And so this is always a big hit when we do this with our listeners. So I try to bring in local musicians for those kinds of things too. And then finally, and this is something I'm really very proud and very excited about, we've done a series over the years. We've done a series of recordings of they're basically custom Sunday Baroque CDs. And the most recent series we've done so far 3 volumes called Hand Picked. And the hand picked references, I sort of hand pick musicians from communities across the country, typically all or mostly in communities where Sunday Baroque is broadcast. And then I ask them to hand pick some recordings to share. And we produce a beautiful custom CD. I have artwork done by some local artist. It's beautifully laid out, beautifully put together. And then we press a bunch of copies and we make it available to stations across the country to use as thank you gifts during their fundraisers. Um,
Oh, that's great. So you use local musicians to create the recordings of
Yes.
music? Is that what you said? Oh,
Yes,
wow, that's
exactly. So this stuff for the most part is not available anywhere else. And this whole package in its entirety is absolutely, we do not sell it online. We do not make it available as a download. It is, you have to support your local station with a gift and they decide the amount or whatever, but you have to go directly to your public radio station to get a copy of this. And that's a way for us to promise these musicians that their investment in giving us this material is honored, but also it's a way to make sure that the stations have kind of they have the monopoly on it, if you will. They've got an exclusive product that a listener can't just go and buy on eBay. Um,
Yeah, that's so great. And it builds the community of the local musicians and it gives them
exactly,
exposure on the radio. So,
exactly.
what if someone's listening and they're like, "Ooh, I want to do that for my ensemble." How could they make that happen?
Well, if it's something in the Baroque genre, and especially if you're in a community where Sunday Baroque is broadcast, I would be very happy to talk to anyone. And you can easily send me an email. If you go to the contact page at sundaybaroque.org, I'd be delighted to entertain a proposal, number one. But the other thing is I'm also happy to try to give advice. So if it's not necessarily a good fit for
Oh,
Sunday
wow.
Baroque, if somebody wants to contact me through the Sunday Baroque website, I'd be absolutely happy to try to brainstorm or give them some suggestions or something.
That's so
Yeah,
great.
yeah,
I'm going to put the link in the show notes so
great.
people can find it easily
Super.
and easily contact you.
Great.
Because I know that the Baroque music is having a resurgence right now.
Yes.
And I know a lot of people who are getting really into playing with Baroque ensembles. And so this is a great way for them to get the word out about their ensemble. And
Yes.
also, I love the idea of, I've been thinking about this and talking about this actually a lot. Well, not a lot, but like I did a post about it. And I've done posts about it previously because I'm obsessed with the idea of making some recording that's not too easy to get. Like
Yes.
within the project itself, making it so that it's exclusive. Because I think if in the world where everything is so easy to get and you can just turn it on and it's free and you're streaming
Yeah.
everything, like isn't it nice to be able to say, "Oh, I have this thing," and no one else can get it? Like I think we got to think about that going into the future for projects, recording projects,
Yes,
especially.
and that's exact. You summed it up beautifully. That's exactly what our little series of handpicked CDs is. It is. This is something special. In fact, we even talk about it on the air that way. We say, you could get 2 copies of this because you can have one for yourself, and then you can get a second. If you contribute at a certain level, you can get a second copy because guess what? If you want to give it as a gift to someone, I can promise you they don't already have it because there's no way they're going to get it.
Yeah.
So,
It's a great way to raise money for the local radio station
exactly,
as well. It's smart.
exactly, exactly.
Did you think of that? That's very smart.
Well, it's been a sort of it's been a collaborative effort. It's something that I have done in
Great.
various incarnations over the years. The way we do it now, with really getting the grassroots ensembles, getting performers in the communities, that was something, that was an idea I borrowed. Okay, I stole it from my colleague at WGUC, who Brian O'Donnell, who has been doing some amazing local CDs. It's a little bit different when you're working with a local station and it's just one community. So he doesn't have to go across the country to find, people in other communities. That they're a Cincinnati-based station, and he is so wonderfully connected personally with so many of these musicians. And I have to say, I've actually played on 2 of the CDs he's produced with other local musicians, and that's been so gratifying. It's been so wonderful. So I've been on both ends of the equation, but yeah, but I think you got to borrow good ideas, right? Um,
Of course. Yeah. I'm always saying you should adapt things. I mean, you can't get all your ideas just
yeah,
out of thin
exactly.
air. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm always doing that when I think about the classical music career point of view.
Yes.
I'm always looking in other areas because everything broadly translates.
Yes.
And you go, someone's talking about a career in I don't know, theater or something, and they say something and it totally applies, or even entrepreneurship or some other kind of area that doesn't, it's not exactly related, but the broad idea does apply. So it's great to adapt other people's
Yes,
ideas. I think
absolutely.
that's
I
important.
agree.
um yeah. So do you have any advice for musicians embarking on a career today, considering that you have really made yourself a a diverse career with radio and also performing, and all of that has turned into a really fruitful career? What would be the advice that you give to people coming out of school today?
That's a fantastic question. I think there's no one right answer for how someone can, fuel their passion for something. In this case, for classical music, and each of us knows in our own core what is the thing that makes us tick. What are our limits? What can I stand and what can't I stand? What point do I have to draw the line?
Yeah.
So for me, it was an obstacle, or it was a mental change of attitude when I suddenly realized that, ooh, I think this radio thing is going to be my love, my career, my life. Because I'd always thought of, people ask me who I am or what I do. I say I'm a musician. That's what I do. I don't make my primary living as a musician anymore, but I am a musician. It is in my DNA. Um,
And I have to just say, to not to interrupt you, but to own that and say that is so, it's like a breath of fresh air, because I think so many people, they think that the definition or the title of musician is like they have to reserve it for if a majority of the money that they make is coming from directly playing their instrument or something. Like they're not allowed to call themselves, I mean, this is real. Like a lot of
yeah,
people really feel like, "Oh, I'm not a real musician if I don't play all the gigs. If I start saying no to some and I have some other time where I'm doing a different job." Like people really struggle
yeah,
with, can I call myself a musician? So I love that you just say, "No, this is what I am broadly is a
yeah,
musician, and then I do all these different things."
yes.
So I think that's really key right there, what you just said.
Thank you. And you raise a really important point. I I suppose there might have been people who, looked and thought, "Oh my gosh, how come she's not playing? Ew," But
Yeah.
honestly, I nobody ever said it to my face. But I think I was probably my own harshest critic, or my own. I agonized over it myself more than anyone else ever, criticized whatever. But I feel like I've owned it right from the beginning. It felt so right, and it has gone so well for me. Maybe I'd feel differently if it didn't go as well as it has gone. But I just feel like this has been the perfect marriage of my abilities, my interests, my passions. I love the fact that I can continue to grow as a player, but also continue to grow as a radio professional. I really try to keep all of those things. I try to keep sharp on them. I try to do things differently. I really try not to just rest on my laurels. I'm still learning new rep as a player, and I'm still,
Yeah.
trying to do things differently on the radio show. So I get but you didn't ask me about my career. You were specifically asking what advice I give to others, and so I guess say um, that to just be open to these incarnations, to be open, to keep your eyes open, to not necessarily turn your nose up at opportunities to learn new skills, even if on the surface they don't seem related. I mean, my first job, full-time job out of college, was a job that I had for sort of like the longer breaks in the last 2 years of college. It was an office, and don't laugh. Now, promise me, Tracy, you're not going to laugh. You just laughed. It was for a telemarketing company. Now, how scary is that? So, it was a big company. I'm not going to give the name, but I worked there, again, summers and long Christmas breaks. And
So were you one of those people that called people on the
yeah,
phone to sell
I
stuff?
was for a little bit. It was mostly businesses we called. So thank goodness I wasn't really bothering people at home. But but, like that's my disclaimer. But, I also did a lot of other stuff there, which was I was I was writing, helping to write scripts, and I was test scripts, and I was also learning. They gave me some sort of quasi managerial duties where I was listening to calls. They say, this call may be monitored for quality control. I was one of the people monitoring for quality control. And then
You always wonder if they actually ever do monitor
oh
it.
yeah, oh yeah. And then I was also giving feedback to the people and saying like, well, here's a different way, or here's how this went, and you might have said it differently, or whatever. And so, like, who could have ever thought? Did I ever think that like my stupid telemarketing job with this big corporation was going to someday support my radio career? But think about it: writing scripts, editing, auditioning people, listening to people and giving feedback, and learning how to deliver scripts in a compelling and convincing way. That is what we do in radio. I mean, that's the definition of radio. So I was unwittingly working in that miserable telemarketing job, learning some really relevant skills. So I guess maybe, look, I always say my blood type is B positive. I always say it's like, that's my attitude, is my blood type, So, maybe I'm putting a positive spin on this or whatever, but I really think that, if you keep your eyes open and you just suck up as much information and knowledge and experience out of whatever experience you're getting, you're learning to be cheerful in the grocery store cashier line, whatever, you're learning how to interact with people, whatever. There's something to be learned and skills to be gained in, pretty much any job you have that you can ultimately apply to something else. So, I can, like I said, I can tell you the specifics of how I got to where I am and what I did and how it worked out for me. For somebody else, it might be different. Somebody else might not be comfortable being on the air, but maybe, maybe there is some other, there's some other entrepreneurial way to use your passion, to use your skills, your knowledge, your thirst for success in the world to, to make something really special for yourself. So I know that's very generic. It sounds like very generic advice to like, to keep your eyes open, but I really think that that's kind of the key to it, no matter what it is just to keep your eyes open, get as much experience as you can, and just be tenacious.
Yeah. I think it's really great advice to keep your eyes open and be open-minded to different opportunities. It doesn't mean just because you were a telemarketer, you're going to be a telemarketer for the rest of your life. Like, I think sometimes people think, oh my gosh, if I take that just labeled me.
Yeah.
Now I'm this.
Right.
And it's not, I was a waitress. It doesn't mean I'm still one, but, and in some ways, like, I think that helped me talk to people. You have to walk up to people and you have to talk to them directly. Like, I think, and in the broad sense, hey, that's a good thing to be able to do, So I think you're right. You don't know what kind of skills you're going to get. Maybe maybe in the future you want to raise money, so you need for your endeavor or your nonprofit that you start or whatever
Yes.
it is. And it'll help you to have a skill set where you feel comfortable talking to people or, so it's like, it could be little skills within a broader skill that you don't know what are going to fill a need later.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think it's great. I think
it's also, you, as you were talking, it put me in mind of the idea that that's also a good way to think about how you want to put your resume together. So again, don't feel self-conscious that like, okay, well, my experience was as a telemarketer, but I I should probably go and try to find my resume from when I first applied 31
Right. You
years
can
ago.
write about the skills,
Right.
right? The skills that you had, that you developed, or that you were doing in that job, and make it sound, for the reader, you could either write, all you write was, I have this telemarketer job from
Yeah.
this date to this
Right.
date. But you could have also listed like the skills that were needed, and because what you just described is like, oh yeah, well, you're helping people realize words that they can use instead of other words that will make a customer feel happier. Like that's a really good practice. So yeah, you would list that on your resume. That's a great
Yes,
idea.
exactly. And again, I feel like almost anything in this world, it's like the lens you look through to see something really makes a difference. And if you look through the lens of like, oh, what a bummer, it's a telemarketing company, or, what a bummer, it's a whatever, fill in the blank. Well, all right, then guess what? It's going to be a bummer because, you don't expect anything more of it. And therefore you're not even looking. And I have to interject this just because, first of all, my hat's off to you for being a waitress. I waitressed for exactly 3.5 hours. I did one, I did one shift, and it was so difficult, and I worked my butt off, and I think I did a fairly decent job for someone who literally was given no training and just kind of thrown in the deep end and given, like, it was, there were three waitresses. I was one of three. They were experienced. They basically said, okay, we got 18 tables. Those are your six. Good luck. And here's your pad of paper. And it was a pizza restaurant, fortunately, so it wasn't too complicated. And people were so mean to me. And I mean, and I'm pretty outgoing and I'm friendly and everything. And I, there were people that didn't tip. And I was so frustrated and so fed up at the end of that. And it has, to this day, now we're talking about something that happened like 34 years ago or whatever. To this day, I always tip extra well because I am so,
Well, that's
oh my,
good. It turned you into a good
I'm
tipper.
so conscious of what a difficult job it is and how rotten some people can be to their wait staff. So, even that I took as like a learning experience. It was like, well, I am not cut out for this. Like this is gonna chew me up and spit me out, and no way. And my
That's so
hats off to
funny.
anybody who is a good server, because it is a very, very hard
Well, I
job.
can tell you, I was a really good server, and this is why I got annoyed when people asked me for stuff, which is part of the job. I shouldn't have been annoyed by that. But what I would do is go, what can I make sure they have so that they never ask me for anything? So I would make sure everything was situated so they could just be happy and leave me alone. I think that was the key. Like, as long as you preemptively get what they need before they even know they need it, you can have an easier time. But it is a really hard job because you suddenly will find yourself so busy that you don't even know what to do first, and that's called in the weeds, and you're just slammed and you don't know what to do. But like, I realized, you're talking about your attitude towards what you're doing, and looking at it as like the skills you're honing in that job, that maybe not necessarily something you want to do for the long term, could be valuable in your life. I didn't have the best attitude all the time about working that job, even though I did have fun at times. I did it for so many years off and on. But mostly I was like, it was hard and it was tiring and everything else. And I probably complained about it more than I should have. But there's this server that that works at one of our favorite bars downtown here. And he's always so happy and everyone loves him. And if he's not working, people are upset. And everyone wants to sit in his section, to the point where the other servers are, like, not making as much money. And I think, my God, this guy, he loves what he's doing in the moment of what he's doing. And I just wish I could have seen that back then.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure if I had just the right amount of espresso, I was probably a little bit like him in my jobs. But like, it is a good perspective to have. Like, maybe this job doesn't define me. Just because I'm doing this when I'm 25 doesn't mean I'm going to be doing. And there are some skills that are probably going to help me later.
Yeah.
So I think that's just ultimately the best advice for musicians, because musicians need to get jobs.
Yeah.
When they don't graduate and magically have a full calendar full of
Right.
gigs. Like, that's not usually going to happen.
Right.
So,
And I have
yeah.
to say, there's another aspect of this that that I want to just kind of put out there, because it was sort of a matter of self-reflection and self-acceptance, and it's kind of the other side of the same coin. And it's that when I was first, I was so sort of single-minded about orchestral player,
Me too.
and So the thing is that, I was so focused on being an orchestral player and assumed that that was going to be it. Um, so I had some really good mentors who prepared me well for the challenging life of someone pursuing an orchestral musician career. So it's not as though I was completely unrealistic about that or unprepared. But I have
Mhm.
to say, when I first got out of school and started trying to take auditions, for example, and started taking on gigs and whatnot, and driving all over the place and getting like $20 for the gig that you just drove 60 miles to
Yeah.
play, and it was fourth piccolo on a Mahler symphony. um, we used to jokingly talk about dollars per note. So, like, if you played fourth piccolo on a Mahler symphony, you technically got more dollars per note because you got paid the same as the principal flutist, but you got a lot more dollars per note because you
Yeah.
didn't play very many notes. But it was really disappointing, and it wasn't musically very gratifying, and it certainly wasn't financially very gratifying. And at a certain point, I had a reality check about whether I even really wanted that as a career, despite the fact that I was so single minded about, this was it. This was what I wanted to do. And I was well prepared for it. I suddenly realized, wow, it was like times 100 that as well prepared as I was for the challenges, it was even more challenging, and it was not as satisfying to me.
Yeah, I know. I wrote a post about this. I haven't published it yet, but I was thinking back to how going into music, your context for what the job requires is your youth orchestra experience and your college orchestra experience. So you think, I mean, why else would you not think anything otherwise besides your teachers are playing in probably the best orchestras? Mine was playing in the Chicago Symphony. And you go, okay, so if I can get paid to have a life where I get to play this great repertoire all the time, this is going to be the best life ever. And then you get out into the real world and you have one gig and it's to play backstage. My case was play backstage on the Mahler Symphony. And let's be clear, playing on any Mahler Symphony is awesome. What about the concerts where you have to play, I don't know, something worse? Something not as exciting,
Right.
something that's all waltzes and all you're playing is the
Yeah.
afterbeats the
Yeah.
whole
Yeah.
time. Like, there's you're right. There's a lot of repertoire out there that isn't like the dream
Right.
repertoire, and the money isn't going to be as big as you necessarily think it is going to
Right.
be, and maybe you don't get that big job. And
Right.
so you're right. You have to be realistic about. I mean, go for those jobs, but also be realistic that there's the other parts of the job. I mean, you could if you seek out other opportunities, you could do all of the above and not put all of your eggs in one
Yeah,
basket.
exactly.
So,
And for me too, it was really a matter of changing my self-identification. At that point of, as I said, I'm a musician and I am a musician, but I definitely went through this little evolution of maybe that's not really what I want to be after all. It wasn't really, it's not really all it's cut out to be. And I have many, many friends who have made the finals of some of the world's great orchestras, like the, Concertgebouw Amsterdam and, major orchestras. And, but they made the finals. They didn't actually make it. And they're fine, fine musicians. And I mean, I guess I went through a period of like redefining myself and saying, I don't know that I want to wait forever to feel I've made it. And in the meantime, maybe not even have very gratifying musical experiences. And so, I guess maybe somebody else might look at that and say, well, your heart wasn't really in it or whatever. But for me, that was my delineation mark that I needed to change my attitude about it. And that's when I started doing more like chamber music and whatnot. So to get back again to your original question, I think for any musician, you have to define yourself, you have to define your boundaries, and at what point you might want to reconsider what you think you really want to do. Like the thing that you thought you wanted to do when you were 16, 18, 20, 25, maybe it evolves, and it doesn't mean you failed if you change your opinion about it. It just means that you've changed your opinion about it.
yeah, and to clarify, like exactly what you're saying is like to get into a space where it's really clean and free of the following things: what other people think,
Hmm.
even what your teachers and mentors
Yeah.
think, and goes strictly to what you want, like deep down. without and taking away what your past self wanted and all of that other stuff, because it can cloud what you think you want if you're thinking, well, I used to want that.
Right.
So how could I say I don't want it
Right.
anymore? Or, my teacher would be disappointed. My parents would be confused about what I was going to do. My friends would think I failed. Like all that noise needs to get cleaned out. And you need to say, is it okay with me to play fourth piccolo on a Mahler symphony for $100 and drive 3 hours or whatever? Like,
Yeah.
and maybe the next week is a better gig and it's closer to home and it's more fulfilling. And maybe that kind of balance is okay with you. And that's fine too. But you have to find out what's good with you and you only, not all the other
Yeah,
stuff.
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And this is not just music. This is any career, you know?
Everything, every
Yeah,
career. Exactly.
absolutely.
Every career. 100%. Suzanne, do you have anything you'd like to promote about your radio show? Any kind of events coming up or anything like that?
Well, let's see. I mean, as I said, we've got the show on. We just are adding a new station. I just found out that Bloomington, Indiana is adding the show. So I'm really excited about that.
That's my IU. That's
Yeah.
where I went to
Oh wow. Oh
undergrad.
wow. So we're over
Yeah.
200 stations, and again, we're just starting off this 20th anniversary year. So I'm hopeful we'll be doing a variety of events and things around the country. I do know I'm playing up in Pullman, Washington for Northwest Public Radio listeners, and I'll be down in Phoenix at some point, probably in the winter or spring, which is a good place to be in the winter. And
Yeah.
I'm hopeful again that there'll be other events. So one of the things we're doing also is a trip with one of our stations. We're doing a trip to Italy in May of 2019. Um,
Well,
so
that's
yeah,
exciting. So where can people follow what you're doing? Is the best place to follow on social media
sure,
or?
exactly. So we're at Sunday_Baroque on Twitter and Instagram, and we're on Sunday Baroque. We're on Facebook as Sunday Baroque, and SundayBaroque.org is our website, and we've got a lot of good stuff there too. And that's where you can access like the blog and also the weekly playlists and the online stream for the most recent program, and as well as all of those the podcast interviews. So yeah, we're like I said, we're real 21st century for a very ancient music program.
That's great. Okay, well, I'll put all those links in the show notes so people can start following you. And I'm interested in that you're in Bloomington. That's so
Yeah.
exciting. Exciting for the IU kids.
Yeah. And all that early music that goes on there,
Yeah.
Bloomington Baroque.
Oh yeah, they've got a lot going on there.
Absolutely.
It's great.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Suzanne, for being on the show. I really appreciate you being on. I've loved hearing your whole
Well,
story.
Tracy, I just really appreciated speaking with you and your wonderful questions, really insightful observations. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Have a good
Thanks.
one.